Hello, travelers, and welcome back to another episode of the Traveler's Guide to Lindwurm. In this episode, we're going to be looking at unit cards, the thing that all units come with, and that somehow I hadn't thought to actually talk about first. Luckily, a viewer did, and so that's what we're going to be talking about. And to start, we're going to be looking at what the anatomy of a card is. And even more high level, let's talk about what a unit card even is in the first place. Each unit in Warcrow has a unit card. These can either be found on Corvusphere or they come in the actual box with the miniatures. A unit card will list all of the basic stats of their unit as well as any abilities that that unit has. Essentially, this is how we know what the models do on the table. These can range from solo character units to units consisting of up to 4 models that will move around the table as one. And before we jump into the anatomy, just one quick piece of terminology that's important is if a card says you or your, it refers to the unit on the card, not to the actual player. So if a card says, you may place a friendly unit, that means it's going to be measured from the unit who has that ability on their card. And things like that. It's a bit of a terminology that's just handy to keep in mind. So let's look at the anatomy of a card, starting with the basic stats. Just follow the red circle popping up around. So first off, top left corner, we see the points cost. This is how much it costs to field the unit. The standard points cost for a game of Warcrow is 250 points. So we're seeing here the Anointed, whose card this is. The cost to field them is 35 points out of that 250 points. Next, we see the movement speed circled here. That is the number with the dash or hyphen between them, so the 2, 3. This is the distance the unit will move during a standard move or in an assault. Note that they get to use both values as part of one movement skill. So you place the leader 2, and then you place the 3. The reason this is because you move around objects in a straight line. Do not get mixed up like some players coming from Infinity do, thinking that the first time you move 2, and the second time you move 3. You do get to use both. And if you were to move twice, you'd get to do it twice. The next the next stat is the charge. That is the number in the square brackets. This is the distance that your unit can move when performing the charge action. So essentially they'll move in a straight distance, 8 strides in this case. Now it's important to remember in Warcrow, movement is done front to back. So essentially you get to add the distance, the size of your base, to the threat distance for the unit. Small bases like that of the Anointed are 2 strides. So essentially, if an Anointed is 10 strides from an enemy, they will be able to charge them. I will go into more depth on movement and the different actions like charge in a later video, but just for now, remember you get to add the base size. The next stat that we see is the wounds. This is the amount of damage that a unit can take before needing to remove a model. So for the Anointed, once the Anointed have taken 3 wounds, you will need to remove one of their 2 models from the table. Next, we have WP, which is willpower. These are the dice that your unit will roll when making willpower tests. So the Anointed get to roll an orange and a yellow dice anytime that they are forced to make a willpower test, whether that be to avoid demoralization or when facing a specific enemy skill that forces a test. The next stat is the morale, the MOR. This is how much stress a unit can take before testing to demoralize. It's important to remember that you are never allowed to choose to go above your morale cap. So if you have an ability to gain stress in exchange for a benefit, you can't do that if it would take you above your morale cap. The only way to go above your morale cap is for your opponent to either cause you to gain stress in some sort of way, or in the off chance that you have a unit with an attached character and that character leaves, sometimes that can push your unit above its morale cap. The next number we see listed is the AVB. This is the availability. This lets us know how many of a given unit you can bring. The Anointed being an elite unit are AVB 1, which means you can only bring one in your company. Other units like the Intact, who are more of a line troop, are AVB 3 or availability 3, which means you could bring up to 3 units of an Intact in your army list. Next, down in the bottom left corner, we see a little image of a person with the number 2 beside it. This is the unit size. If a unit is composed of more than one model, you'll see a number in the bottom left corner, and this number will indicate how many models are in the unit. So from this, we know that an Anointed is made up of 2 models. That means when you field a unit of Anointed, when you first deploy them, you will put down 2 Anointed models. Finally, up top, it's hard to see that it's circled, there's the unit portrait. That's the little picture of the Intact up right by the points value. And it's not highlighted, but right beside it, we see the name Anointed. That is the name of the unit. So those are all the basic stats. Now let's move on and look at abilities and the combat panel. So, before we do that, we're also going to look at the 2 lines right below the basic stats. These are the characteristics and keywords. The first line is the characteristics. These are descriptive labels that may interact with certain keywords or other abilities. So for example, here we see the Anointed are human and infantry. This characteristic may come up when, for example, looking at whether a unit can join them. We'll see later that some models will have the keyword join and then in brackets what they can join. So if, for example, there was a character with join infantry, we could look at the Anointed. We see that they have the characteristic of infantry, which would mean that character can join them. If they had, for example, a character that said join human infantry, we can look at the Anointed. They have both the characteristics of human and infantry. It means they can be joined. These characteristics usually are more for checking whether another effect gets to come into play, rather than looking at whether, giving a specific ability to that unit. This is where they differ from keywords. So keywords, the second line, refer to general special rules that can be found in the core book that the unit has. In the case of the Anointed, they have both Fearless and Intimidating 1. If you were to look into the rulebook, you will see that Fearless is described there as making it so your unit is immune to the Frightened condition, as well as the Intimidating keyword. Intimidating, on the other hand, causes opponents to take morale checks when your units first become engaged. So these are all abilities that you will be able to find in the rulebook itself, and aren't necessarily unique like the abilities later on their card, the unit's card, to that specific unit. Below the characteristics and keywords, we see this large boxed off area. This is what's referred to as the combat panel. This covers the unit's attack values, defense values, and the unit's ability to control objectives. Now I will break down the combat panel in more detail in a little bit, so just hang on and we'll get there. In the final part of the card, we will see spells and skills. This outlines all the different special skills and spells, if the unit has any, that the unit has access to. Again, after we look at the combat panel in more detail, we will break down what we're going to get out of the spells and skills and how to read those. So, looking at the combat panel, we see there's a few different components. First, we see there's these numbers on the side. You see the 2+ circled and the 1. This is the members. This is how we checking how many troops must be alive to use a given attack or defense value. So if we look, we see a 2+. That means as long as the unit of Anointed has 2+ models remaining, that they get to use the top attack value and defense value, so that top band. And if they're down to 1 model, we use the bottom band. Now, you might think, Why does it say 2+? If an anointed unit is made up of only 2 models, how do you have plus? Well, if you have an attached officer, the officer does count towards this troop number. So if you have an officer attached to your anointed, then you'd actually have 3 anointed. And if one of the anointed dies, you'd still have 2, for the purposes of determining which attack and defense value to use. Next, and I only boxed off the top part, the entire area boxed off here is the attack value on the left and then the defense value on the right. So this includes the dice, and symbols, any switches, and modifiers. This is important. There are sometimes abilities that refer to a unit's dice attack value or defense value, and this is what we're talking about when you see that. It's everything in there, the ability to stress to add things and any switches as well as the dice. Now popped up a little thing there. You see these 3 circles. There's a bow and arrow, a sword, and a castle. These indicate whether the dice that they're describing are what type they are. So the bow and arrow is a ranged attack. The sword is a melee attack and indicates a melee attack, and the little castle is the defense. The defense does apply to both ranged and melee attacks. Right beside the bow and arrow, you see a number. This is the range of the melee attack in question. So this is listed in strides. So essentially, if a unit has a range of 18, if their target is within 18 strides of their team leader, then they will be able to declare the ranged attack against them, assuming that they have things like line of sight. So breaking down the attack and defense values a bit more, see right now the circle there, this is the attack roll. This is all the dice and automatic symbols that will make up your attack when you what you're going to actually roll base, as well as any automatic symbols. So we see here, the anointed have an attack roll of a red, 2 yellow, a green, and a hit. When they degrade, you see it goes down to an orange, 2 yellow, a hit, and a blue. There are some abilities that will specifically reference using an attack roll and rolling attack that might not be a full attack. This is what you'd be rolling. So if it just says use the attack roll, it means you don't get switches and you can't stress to modify. The most prevalent example of this is when making an attack of opportunity. It says to make an attack roll. So that means when you're doing an attack of opportunity, you do not get to stress to add any additional dice or symbols, and you do not get any of your switches. Similarly, the defense roll is the exact same thing, but under the defense label. So for the anointed, there's the 2 green, a black, and a yellow, and then when degraded, just a green and a blue. I mentioned before switches. Switches are listed underneath their related attack or defense. And these are special effects that can be triggered by spending symbols in your roll. So looking at the example of the top left, where we have 2 specials, that's the exclamation marks, canceling 1 shield from your target. This means that if when the anointed roll their dice, they have 2 specials, they can spend them, so it means they can't be used for anything else, to cancel 1 shield or 1 block from their target. Once a symbol is spent, it cannot be spent again for another switch. However, if you have if you have enough symbols to trigger a switch multiple times, so for example, if the anointed had 4 specials, 4 exclamation marks, you are allowed to trigger a switch multiple times. So if the anointed had 4 specials when attacking, they could cancel 2 blocks from their opponent. The next part of the attacks and defense is the modifier or stress modifiers. These are denoted by a little lightning bolt and then a plus, and then you'll either see symbols, as is listed here, or in some cases, dice. This indicates that a unit may stress, and if they choose to stress themselves when, for example, making attack or defending, they get to add those symbols to their die roll. So in this case, if the anointed was attacking and chose to stress themselves, they would add a hit and a special, bringing their effective die roll and automatic symbols to a red, 2 yellow, a green, 2 hits and a special. Now, as I said before, you cannot choose to stress yourself if it will bring you over your morale cap, so just be mindful of that. And the final part of the command panel is the conquest value. You see this over on the right. It's the number inside the spiky circle, as I like to call it. This number is how you determine how much value a unit adds to a objective that they are contesting. This is how you determine who controls the objectives. So, for example, if the Anointed with their Conquest of 1 was standing on an objective, moved on to an objective, and the opponent had a single model with Conquest 0, then the Anointed would take control of the objective. If, however, there was already a unit with 1 conquest on there, they would not have more, and so they wouldn't flip it to their control. You always need to have more to flip it. A tie essentially goes to the defender. So, conquest value is very important. As I say over and over again, you win games by scoring objectives, not by killing. So, if you can just put a bunch of conquests on a point, that's better than trying to kill and push someone off, because you can just take it without needing to rely on the dice. And speaking of dice, let's take a look at the Warcrow dice. I know for a lot of people coming into the game, the dice can be kind of intimidating. They are non-standard 8-sided dice with different symbols depending on colors, and a lot of people are just, even when I remember when I started, I was like, I have no idea what the different dice are or mean or what's good and what's bad, so let's take a look at that. You can break down the dice into 2 types. I'm going to call them warm dice. These are the offensive dice, and the cool colored dice. These are the defensive dice. So for color theory, the warm colors are things like red, orange, yellow. The cooler colors are things like the blue, in this case also the green and the black. So let's look at the warm colors first. As I said, these are your offensive dice. So these are the red, orange, and yellow. And depending on the dice, you have different combinations of symbols. In this case, hits, hollow hits, specials, the exclamation marks, and hollow specials. And depending on the dice, generally speaking, you consider red is better than orange is better than yellow. That said, depending on what type of symbol you really are looking for, that might not always be the case. For example, some characters, let's say there's a unit that has a switch that for a single special, it turns it into a hit. Well, now a die, or 2 hits, now a die that has more specials and less hits may actually be more valuable. So let's see which has the most. So as I said, red is generally considered the best, and that's because it has the most hits, the star symbol. So red has more than orange is more than yellow. And importantly, red also has 2 chances to get 2 hits on a face, which means red is the only die that can score more than 1 hit when you roll it. If you were rolling 3 orange dice, your maximum damage is 3. Whereas if you were rolling 3 red, your maximum damage is actually 6. So red, if you're just trying to do damage with hits, red is the best. Next, we have the hollow hit. Now, there are some units that do have powerful switches off of hollow hits, and in this case, yellow actually has the most. Yellow has 2 hollow hits, whereas the other 2 both have 1. So red and orange are equal in terms of hollow hits. Yellow has 2 more, so if you do have a powerful ability that procs off of hollow hits, it makes yellow a lot better. Additionally, let's say you have a strong ability, let's say ability that gives you 2 hits for a hollow hit. Well, now, arguably the yellow is going to do more damage between the hollow hit switch and the regular hits than, say, orange, which, has similar numbers of hits. The math gets a bit hard, but really, if you're fishing for hollow hits, yellow is your way to go. Normal hits, red, then orange, then yellow. Now, where yellows are the clear winner is specials. Yellows have the most specials on a die face, then orange, and then red. And just like red has with hits, yellow has the chance to generate 2 specials on a single die face. And finally, the hollow special. Orange actually has the highest number of orange specials, and then yellow, and notably red has 0 holo specials. So for whatever reason you're really looking for a holo special, you're not going to find it on a red. This is also a good time to point out, you can never roll more than 3 of a given color. So for example, if you have a unit that had 3 yellow dice and a character that gave them an extra yellow dice, well, you're still only rolling 3 yellow dice. You can never roll more than 3 of a specific color. Having talked about the warm colors, let's move on to talk about the cool colors. These are the defensive dice, the green, the blue, and the black. Just like before, the general rule of thumb is green is better than blue, blue is better than black. And this comes down to blocks. In terms of which has the most blocks, green has more blocks on it than blue, blue has more than black. And just like red with hits, green has the chance of getting 2 blocks on a single die face. In terms of most holo blocks, it is the exact same as holo hits. Black has the most, and then green and blue are tied. Continuing on the similarities, when it comes to specials, black, just like yellow, have more than any of the others, and they have more than blue, and blue has more than green. And just like yellows, black also have the chance to roll up 2 specials on a single die face. And identical to the assault, you're seeing the similarities between the 2 pools. Blue is better than black at getting holo specials, and there are no holo specials on the green die. Okay, so now that we have a bit of a more understanding of dice, which more applies to the combat panel part, now let's look at the rest of the card, and that's the spells and skills. And as I've said before, the spells and the skills, these are special abilities that are generally unique to the unit itself, and that they have access to. Okay. So, there are 5 types of skills/spells that we need to discuss. The first are skills. These are denoted by the yellow star in a green circle. And these are activated with a simple action, or in the case of skills that have the kind of double triangle like Bone and Sinew has, that means that it will be a long action. So instead of just spending a simple action, you will need to spend both of your actions to do it. Otherwise, the skill itself will list in italics beside the name of the skill essentially what the triggering effect or how you choose your target of the ability. And then you'll have the plain text below that will list what the actual ability does. So looking at Bone and Sinew, we see target, which means you need to have line of sight, and it says enemy unit within 8 strides. So that means you will pick an enemy unit that you have line of sight to within 8 strides. And then resolve the actual skill itself. In this case, rolling 2 orange, and if you succeed, place your target engaged in combat with you and then attack. So that's how simple a skill is. That will take both your actions because it has the double triangle, but if it didn't, it would just be a single simple action. The next type of skill is called a command skill. That's denoted by the 7-pointed star inside the brown circle. In this case, the example, that's bone armor. Command skills do not require an action. However, they will require you to spend one of your command tokens. We haven't looked at command tokens yet, but they are a resource that certain characters and in some cases units bring to your company. It is a finite resource that you spend, and once it's gone, it's gone. So command skills are generally powerful abilities that use up this resource. Otherwise, they are exactly like a skill in that they have the name of the skill followed by how you trigger it or when you trigger it in italics, and then what the actual ability does. So in this case, when you get to use bone armor when you roll your defense, you can spend a command token to trigger it, and then you may, as it says, suffer up to 2 stress to fix a die of your roll for each stress that you received. So command skills are generally powerful because you are limited to how many command tokens you brought, so you're limited to how many times you can use them. Next, we have the passive skills. These are denoted by the kind of three-leafed symbol inside the lighter brown circle. And these are effects that are always active and always available to the unit. Otherwise, these you don't need to pay for with actions, and you don't need to pay for with command tokens. This means they are also always active even in your opponent's turns. Now, a lot of them won't care about that, but that'll come down to when they trigger. And just like other skills, how they trigger is in italics beside the name of the skill, followed by, in plain text, what the actual ability is doing. Now, not on the Anointed's card, there is a fourth type of skill, and that is tinge skills. These are denoted by the tinge symbol, that kind of ink blot type symbol on a black circle. Now, this work exactly like skills. They take up a simple action unless they have the double triangle, meaning they're a long action. But in addition to using up actions, they also will require you to spend a tinge off your unit to activate. It is important to notice or recognize that the perform a tinge skill action is a different action than the perform a skill or cast a spell action, which means if you had a simple action tinge skill and a simple action skill on your card, you could use both in your activation. It's important to recognize that because you can't use the same simple action twice other than move. So, for example, if you have two skills on your card, you cannot activate both in the same activation. And finally, of the spells and skills, there are spells. Spells are denoted by a purple circle with a kind of diamond shape on them, as you can see there. And just like skills, they do cost a simple action to use, and in some cases, when denoted, the long action. And this is what you'll need to spend in order to cast. Now, again, these are a different action than perform a skill or perform a tinge skill, so you can cast a spell and use a skill in the same action. Now, I will go into greater detail into how to actually walk through the spell casting process in a different video, but it is a bit lengthy, so I'm going to leave it for then. I will just quickly note that if we look at a spell, as we see on the screen now, you'll sometimes see these kind of black dots, or black dice, and then additional effects to the spell itself. These are called alterations. The black dice indicate how many dice you will be rolling during a tinge roll after casting your spell, and essentially you're choosing to increase the risk of that tinge roll in exchange for gaining additional benefits on your spell. So for example, here you can for one black dice you can reduce the duration of the spell, and for two black dice you can target an additional allied unit. If you were to use both of these augments, that means when you made your tinge roll, you would have to roll 3 black dice to see if you're gaining additional tinge. On other cards, you'll see what are called tinge alterations. Now, this is at this time limited to Scions casters. Essentially, it will look the exact same as the spell here, but instead of black dice, you'll see the tinge symbol. And this indicates how much tinge that caster has to spend before casting the spell to add the listed alteration to the spell. So rather than increasing the risk of a tinge roll afterwards, the casters using tinge alterations are front-loading it by spending tinge that they have on them, removing the tinge from their cards in order to buff their spells. And this just reflects the, at least at this time, the Scions method of embracing the tinge and using the tinge, whereas the other casters of the world are more wary of embracing and using the tinge. So that was a basic unit card. We're going to start getting into the character card, but before I do, if you are liking this content or any of the other content, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel, and leave any comments you have about different thoughts you have about these videos, or if there's any particular area of the rules or any particular videos that you would like to see. I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Additionally, there is also a link in the description to a Buy Me a Coffee if you wanted to support the channel financially. And if you were to do that and also had specific requests, those will be for videos. Those would be, of course, prioritized over those that aren't supporting the channel financially. Again, I'll probably get to everything anyways, but just as a bit of an extra thank you for those that choose to do it that way. But with that, let's get into what a character card looks like. And looking at the card, you might think, well, it looks almost identical to a unit card, and you would be correct. It is the exact same format as a non-character card with a couple additions, and in some ways a few subtractions. The notable thing that's missing is you'll notice in the combat panel, there is no degraded profile, and that's because, well, if the Walker of the Leaf Storm in this case dies, there's only one. There's only a unit of one. It can only have one, so you don't need different attack profiles for different numbers of models in the unit. The other notable addition that you'll see, and you can see it right under the portrait of the character there, which is the symbol that denotes what type of character the unit is. And you'll see two. In this case, we see the scroll symbol. That means that the Walker of the Leaf Storm is a support character. This has a few automatic meanings. This means that the unit does not count towards the models in their unit, remaining in their unit for unit size, as we discussed before, and they won't become the group leader. Neither of these matters to the Walker of the Leaf Storm because they can't attach to units. The second symbol you might see is the officer symbol, and that is the helmet. Units that are officers do count towards the number of models remaining in a unit when they're attached and do become the group leader. Additionally, as we mentioned before, characters will, in some fairly consistently, will bring command tokens. That's that little symbol under the points value and beside to the left of the portrait. That symbol denotes how many command tokens that unit will generate by being in your company. In this case, the Walker of the Leaf Storm has one command token, so that means they will add one command token to your company. If they had 2 or even 3 command tokens in that little banner, then that means they would bring 2 or even 3 command tokens to your company. Now, I bring this up in the character section, but there are some non-character units that do also generate command tokens, so don't forget to look at your non-character units to see if they're adding to your pool of command tokens. Now, looking at a different character, this is the Magister, and the Magister is an attachable character. And what that means is the Magister can join certain types of units. If we look in the keyword section, you'll see that the Magister has the keyword join and then brackets infantry. That means that the Magister can join any infantry. And to look and see what they are bringing to their unit when attached, we look at the bottom of their card in the now red boxed off area. You can literally, the way it's designed, slide the card underneath the unit they're joining, blocking off the top half, because when they are attached, we don't really care about the top half. We only care about the bottom. So let's look at how to read that bottom section and what's being added. So first, we see WP. We see the willpower again. In this case, it says willpower and then red, yellow. Now, when attached, you'll see this represented in one of two ways. You'll either see it like here, where it'll just list to the dice, or you'll see a little plus and then dice listed. If it's a plus and then dice listed, that means that those dice are added to the unit that it's being attached to's willpower. Whereas in the case of the Magister, if there isn't a plus, it means it replaces. So that means if the Magister joins a unit, no matter what their willpower is, their willpower will now be red, yellow. If it said plus red, yellow, then that would mean that the red and yellow dice were added to the unit's willpower, whatever they already had. Next stat increase that we see is morale +1, and this quite simply means that while attached, the unit that the Magister is in has 1 higher morale than they would without him. Now, it's not present on the Magister's card, but you will also sometimes see +W, which is plus wounds, which just increases the number of wounds that the unit has, which means that you need that many more wounds in order to remove a model from the unit. So a 2-wound unit with wounds +1 would be 3 wounds, which now you need to take 3 damage before removing a single unit. To remove a second unit, you'd need another 3 wounds, and so on. Now, just like the combat panel, the attached profile has attack bonuses as well. In this case, you see under the sword symbol a plus orange blue. That means that the unit the Magister has attached to gets to add an orange and blue die whenever they attack. Similarly, when defending, the Magister's unit gets to add a blue and a special. Now, it's important to note that while it's not present here, just like a normal attack, the attached profile of a character can sometimes include both switches, which would be underneath. So if there was a switch, it would be underneath the blue and special that the unit now has access to, and stress modifiers, which would be in the black bar beside a lightning bolt, beside the either castle or sword. Now, if your unit has a stress modifier already, and the character gives you another stress modifier, you are allowed to activate both of them, but you will need to pay a stress for each. So if you want to activate both, you would have to stress twice. The final stat bonus that characters will often or sometimes give is to conquest. And just like with willpower, if there is a plus, it adds to the unit's conquest, and if there is no plus sign, it replaces the unit's conquest. So here we see the Magister just says 2, not +2, so that means he will set the unit that he joins, his conquest, to 2. The final part of the attached card is the skills, just like on a basic unit. So here we're seeing that the Magister is giving 2 different command skills as well as a passive skill to their unit. These skills are essentially, when attached, you just count these as if they were skills on the unit's card itself, and they have access to them in the same ways they would. So for example, with command skills, they will need to pay command tokens to access them, and in terms of passive skills, they're just always active. And in terms of regular skills, they would be able to access them by spending an action or long action if required. Now, I will say, keep note, if you see just above the box, you see in the 2-arm skill, it says permanent. Keep an eye out for skills that say permanent that are going to be covered when you're attached. Permanent abilities are always active, whether the unit is attached, unattached, off the board, or even if they have died, a permanent ability will always be in effect. Now that we've looked through the whole card, I just want to give some final thoughts and things to remember at the end of the video. So, first thing, and it's kind of nice, all cards have the same basic things. You'll have your basic stats, you'll have your keywords, your characteristics, your combat panel, and any skills and abilities that your unit has. Now, the values of these and what specific abilities will change, but once you understand how to read a card, you can read any of them. As I said before, you remember that you or your in an ability is referring to the unit. It's from their perspective, that perspective, and remembering that it's referring to the unit as you, not you as the player, will help you understand how, what different abilities do. It'll help make more sense. Another thing to remember is that characteristics, keywords, and abilities of the unattached mode of an attached character do not transfer to their unit. So, for example, if a character was a spellcaster or a noble, while attached to a unit, they are no longer considered a spellcaster or noble, so any effects that proc off of being near noble wouldn't apply. Now, there are some exceptions. There is the keyword of tinge. Keyword tinge specifically is called out as continuing to apply even when attached, meaning that even when a tinge character is attached to a unit, that unit will now gain tinge. Other notable ones is a high command unit. It's a characteristic. While your unit will not be considered a high command unit, abilities that require a high command to be near them, a high command model, will still apply. And of course, as I mentioned before, any ability or skill that has permanent be listed in it. Permanent skills are always active, whether the unit is on the table, off the table, in a unit, or even if they're dead. Finally, the most up-to-date versions of cards are the ones that are on Corvusphere. So sometimes over time, units may get updated, wordings of abilities might get changed, and those will be found in Corvusphere. And luckily there is a print function, so if you want, you can print out those new cards, put them in your sleeves, and get back onto the game table with the most up-to-date rules for your units. But with that has been the Traveler's Guide to Lindwurm chapter on unit cards. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it helps you understand how to read the unit cards more. And please let me know if there are any other chapters of the guide that you would like to see. I already have a few planned, including looking at movement, morale, and even just the basic actions of the game. But if there's anything in particular that you think would be helpful for your fellow travelers out there, please let me know, and I'll try to work it in. But with that, may the dice be ever in your favor.